Today we will be adding and subtracting mixed numbers. And so let's take a look at our first problem here. It asks us to add or subtract, and the first one is an addition problem. So the key with adding mixed numbers is to add the fractions. We need to come up with a common denominator. So what I'm going to end up doing is rewriting the problem like this: 6 3/10, and then I'm going to line them up in a column format. 1 2/5. And I think the reason I like to do it this way is that this way I can change the fractions out to the right of the problem, and it'll be easier to come up with an answer this way. I think there'll be less parts of confusion. So here I see that I need a 10, where 10 has factors of 5 and 2, where the 5 just has factors of 5 and 1. So all I need to do is multiply this 5, or 2/5, by 2 over 2, because that's the factor it's missing. So if you look at 10, it has factors of 5 and 2, and 5 just has the 5. So if I just multiplied this by a 2, I'd get that common denominator. So I'll go ahead and multiply straight across. I'm left with a 4/10. So now I'm going to add up those whole numbers here. The 6 and the 1 give me 7, and then I add the two fractions, the 3/10 and the 4/10. And so if I have 3/10 and 4/10, that makes 7/10 altogether. So 7 and 7/10. Same sort of thing on the next one. I'm just going to rewrite the problem, put the 2 3/5, and then 1 1/20. And so I see that I could just multiply the 5 by 4, and that'll give me a common denominator. So I'll multiply it by 4 over 4, and what that makes is a 12/20. So I still have 2, but now it's 12/20. Same fraction as 3/5. It's an equivalent fraction, just different denominator. So I'm adding, and I just count up the whole numbers first of all. 2 and 1 make 3, and then I count up how many 20ths I have. So here I have 12/20, and 1/20 makes 13/20. And so there's my answer, 3 and 13/20. Well, the next problem, the denominators are a little bit tougher. So I'm going to break these down. See, I have 5 and 2 here. I have 4 and 2 here. So I see that I need to multiply this 9 over 10 by a 4. That's the factor it's missing. This 5/8 needs a 5. That's the factor it's missing. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply those numbers and go ahead and rewrite it in this column format. So 9 times 4 makes 36, and then 10 times 4 makes 40. So now I have an equivalent fraction there. 2 and 5 times 5 makes 25. Down below, 8 times 5 makes 40. So I go ahead and add them together. But the problem is when I add them, I'm getting an improper fraction when I do that. First of all, add the whole numbers. I get 7. 5 and 2 make the 7. 36 and 25. So I'm adding those two numbers together. And when I do that, you see how I end up with a 61, which is bigger than 40. So what I need to do is subtract the 61 from 40 and see what's left over, because I've got more than what I need. And so I'm going to change that mixed number to this improper fraction to a mixed number. And so I end up with 21 when I subtract. So what I'm left with is, again, I took that 61 over 40, and that's the same thing as 1 and 21 over 40. See, I went ahead and saw 40 went into 61 one time, with 21 left over. That's what I got when I subtracted those two numbers. So I'm going to take this 1 right here, and I'm going to add it to the 7. So I'm adding these two numbers together. And that's how I'm getting 8 and 21/40. That's the answer I have. So we'll see the same situation on this next problem. Again, break these numbers down, find out what the lowest common denominator is. Look for the biggest factor that goes in them. See, 4 goes into both 12 and it also goes into 8. So 4 times 3 makes the 12, 4 times 2 makes the 8. So if I multiplied the 11/12 by 2 and the 7/8 by 3, I'd have a common denominator. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it in that column format. So 2 and 22/24, and then 3 and 21/24. And so when I add those together, 2 and 3 again make 5, but 22 and 21, when I add those two numbers together, that gives me something bigger than 24. It gives me 43. And so I have 5 and 43/24. So I have that same situation again. I need to change that 43/24 to an to a mixed number. And so I'm going to go ahead and subtract those two numbers, 43 from 24, because I see that 24 goes in there one time. And when I do that subtraction, I'm left with a 9, because I had to borrow here. This changes to a 3, so that makes a 19. So when I did 43/24, changed it to a mixed number, it went in there one time. 24 went into 43 one time, with 19 left over. So I'm going to take that 1 and I'm going to add it to the 5. And so when I add those two numbers together, that makes 6. So I have 6 and 19/24. And that's the answer I get. So let's take a look at the next few problems. These are subtraction problems. Same sort of thing though. All you're going to do is come up with a common denominator. So I see I can multiply this by 5/5 and this one by 3/3. They're both prime numbers, the denominators were, so I just multiplied by the other's denominator. So 6 and 10/15. I'm taking away 3 and 9/15. So I do the subtraction. I do the fraction first here. 10 minus 9 makes 1/15. 6 minus 3 makes 3. So 3 and 1/15. Well, the next one, same sort of thing. Not prime numbers, but 3 is, and those don't have any common factors. So I'm just multiplying by the other's denominator. So now I have 10 and 9/12, and I'm taking away 6 and 4/12. So when I go ahead and do the subtraction, I'm left with 4 and 5/12. Not so bad yet, but this one's going to be a little bit trickier. See, here I don't have a fraction, but I need to subtract the fractions. That's always what I'm dealing with. So since I don't have a fraction here, I'm going to make a fraction. I'm going to borrow 1 from this 9 and change it to an 8. So I'm going to have 8 plus 1. But instead of writing 1, I'm going to write a different number. So I'm going to bring down this 8. But instead of 1, I'm going to write it as 10/10. Now the reason I picked 10/10 is because the denominator here is exactly the same. I want to use whatever the denominator is. If this 3/10 were a 3/4, then I'd use 4/4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract the 5 and 3/10. And when I do that, 10/10 minus 3/10 makes 7/10. 8 minus 5 makes 3, so 3 and 7/10. I'm going to use that same concept of borrowing on this next problem. So we'll see how it works. So come up with that common denominator first. 4 and 2 make 8. And 10 would be 2 and 5. So I need to multiply 7/8 by 5/5, and 9/10 by 4/4. So I do that, I've got 5 and 35/40. But I'm taking away, oops, not 6 now, but 3. 3 and 36/40. So here's my problem. You see, I can't take away 36 from 35 because I'm going to end up with a negative number, and you don't want to do that with the fractions like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow. It's just the same concept as if you had, let's say, 13 and you were taking away 15. You'd have to borrow from the 3. I changed that to a 2, and now I have 11 rather than just 1. And so I'd end up with 6 here, and 2 minus 1 makes 1, so I'd end up with 16. Same sort of concept here. So we're going to borrow from the 5, change it to a 4, and I'm going to add 1. I'm going to add 1 to this, but instead of writing 1, I'm going to write it as 40/40, because in order to add fractions, you need to have the same denominator. So I do that and make 75/40, and now I can go ahead and do the subtraction. So I need to subtract 36 from 75. So I'll go ahead and do that off to the side here. Borrow a little bit, just like we just did. That makes this a 6. And do the subtraction, get 9 here and 3 here. So this makes 1 and 39/40. That's the answer. Let's take a look at our last two problems, or some word problems. So looking at this one, it says Tucker ran 5 3/8 miles on Monday, 3 3/4 miles on Tuesday. How far did he run on both days? So both days means that we need to add these two numbers together. And so I have 5 3/8 and 3 3/4. I'm adding them, so I need to come up with that common denominator. So I'll multiply this by 2/2, so this makes 6/8. And now I can go ahead and add the two fractions together. So I have 5 plus 3 is 8. 3/8 and 6/8 makes 9/8. Well, we've got another improper fraction, so I need to go ahead and change this to a mixed number. So 8 into 9 goes one time. So basically all I'm doing is 8 into 9 goes one time with 1 left over. So 1 and 1/8. But you got to add the 1 and the 8 together. So we're adding those two numbers. And that's where I'm getting 9 and 1/8. So 9 and 1/8 miles. The last problem, it says, at birth, a pilot whale is 4 3/5 feet long. A newborn gray whale is 15 1/4 feet long. How much longer is the newborn gray whale? How much longer? So this tells us that we need to subtract the two numbers. So we need to subtract the length of the pilot whale from the length of the gray whale, because it's asking how much longer is the gray whale. So 15 1/4, we're going to take away the 4 3/5. So we come up with a common denominator. So I'm going to end up multiplying this 1/4 by 5 over 5. And this 3/5 I need to multiply by 4 over 4. So I end up with a 5 over 20. And here I get 12 over 20. But remember, we're subtracting, so we've got a problem. I can't subtract the 12 from 5, so I need to borrow. Borrow from the 15. Let's change that 15 to a 14 and add 1 to this fraction. Well, I'm going to write 1 as 20/20. So that makes 25/20 when I add those two numbers together. And now I can do the subtraction. So 25/20, I'm taking 12/20 away from that 25/20. So 12 from 25 gives me 13/20. And then 14 minus 4 gives me 10. So 10 and 13/20 feet is the difference between those two lengths. Well, those are the types of problems that you're going to end up seeing on tonight's homework. Good luck.